Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Russia has conducted another overnight attack on Ukrainian cities, killing 3 people. Meanwhile, the EU wants to implement a new sanctions package to slow down the Kremlin's war machine. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first let's take a look at the latest headlines. Vote of confidence for the Polish government to be held on Wednesday. Romania's new president visits EU-aspiring Moldova. And rocked by scandals, the Polish national football team faces Finland. Russian missile and Shahed strikes drown out the efforts of the United States and others around the world to force Russia into peace, wrote Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy after another night of terror in Kyiv and Odesa, which left 3 people dead and 12 wounded. Zuzanna Jurek reports on the latest developments in Ukraine.
Kyiv faced yet another wave of indiscriminate Russian strikes, which targeted civilian and critical infrastructure, including a maternity hospital.
The building affected by one of the large fires was on the premises of the emergency medical center. So far, we know of 2 dead people. 9 others were wounded.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy took to social media to indicate the scale of the most recent attack.
For yet another night, instead of a ceasefire, there were massive strikes with Shahed drones, cruise and ballistic missiles. Today was one of the largest attacks on Kyiv. Odesa, the Dnipro region and the Chernihiv region were also targeted. In total, Russia used 315 drones in the attack, including 250 Shaheds and 7 missiles, 2 of which were North Korean-made ballistic missiles. Residential buildings and urban infrastructure were damaged.
The latest series of strikes comes less than 48 hours after record attacks perpetrated by the Kremlin, which saw almost 500 drones deployed to target locations across Ukraine.
This surge is perhaps more related to the increased capabilities of Russia to launch such drones, for instance.
But for Gabrielius Landsbergis, the former foreign minister of Lithuania, these escalations could speak to a particular weakness of the Kremlin.
They cannot distinguish so well the military objects within Ukraine, and therefore then they resort to the terrorist tactics that they have been actually employing since the beginning of the war, attacking civilians. So I think that it is not unlikely that we would see Russia doing more of this.
These confrontations followed the Istanbul talks between Russia and Ukraine on June 2nd. Though the 2 sides agreed to a prisoner swap which began on Monday, a tangible ceasefire agreement remains out of reach.
The bombing has escalated more than before peace was being discussed. Something like 400 missiles and drones fell on Ukrainian cities in the last couple of nights of peace. And he's escalated the ground war to try and grab some more ground before perhaps it stops.
Ukraine has responded in kind, destroying 10 to 12% of the Kremlin's nuclear-capable long-range bomber fleet during a joint operation on June 1st. Though the operation was seen as a huge success, EU officials continue to warn that the constantly evolving theater of war will require innovative measures.
The biggest change in warfare is clear. Today, 80% of targets in Ukraine are destroyed by drones. Every 2 months, there is a need for radical innovation of the drones in operation, as the Russians learn to jam or intercept the previous models.
And based on the scenes observed in Ukraine over the past 72 hours, these innovations must be fast and robust. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
The European Commission has proposed a new 18th round of sanctions against Russia, aimed at slowing the Kremlin's ability to finance its invasion of Ukraine. This time, the EU wants to target Russia's gas pipelines and banks, which circumvent the already existing restrictions. Our correspondent Alex Kadir reports from Brussels.
Russia is cruel, aggressive and a danger to us all. Those were the words of Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat, alongside European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen when they were announcing this long-awaited 18th round of sanctions against Russia, the 18th round since the start of the full-scale invasion back in 2022. Now, we heard from President von der Leyen herself announcing this new round of sanctions. Long awaited, I say, because there has been an expectation that the EU needs to do more. We have seen France and others threatening Russia with more sanctions if Russia did not engage constructively in peace talks. Now, clearly, the feeling among European leaders in Brussels and around the continent is that Russia is just playing for time. That is why these sanctions have been announced. We heard from Ursula von der Leyen herself laying out what the plan is. Let's have a listen.
For the first time, we propose a transaction ban for Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. This means that no EU operator will be able to engage directly or indirectly in any transaction regarding the Nord Stream pipelines. There is no return to the past. We also propose to lower the oil price cap from $60 to $45 per barrel.
Now, that oil price cap, Ursula von der Leyen just mentioned, $45 per barrel, down from $60 per barrel, is tricky because Ursula von der Leyen also said she wants to do this as the G7 countries, which includes the United States. So they will need to make sure that Donald Trump is on board. She said she wants to continue these price cap measures as part of the G7. Not clear if that means Europe would go it alone without the United States. The other problem, of course, is circumvention. Russia has found ways with its shadow fleet, with uninsured ships, to ship oil elsewhere in the world, avoiding these European sanctions. Now, Ursula von der Leyen did say that they were going to crack down on the circumvention of sanctions, but there is a broader structural problem within the European Union. It feels like the EU is getting to the limits of what it can do in the current situation with its sanctions. One explanation for that was provided by Gabrielius Landsbergis, the former foreign minister of Lithuania, who I spoke to earlier today. This is what he had to say.
We've been placed in a position where Orban is our ceiling. Europe cannot outgrow Viktor Orban. He tells us how far can we go. This is our, glass ceiling, whatever, call it what you want, but this is the common denominator of Europe. We won't be stronger than Hungary allows us to, and we haven't challenged that.
So clearly there is still the issue now of the member states. Will Hungary, will Slovakia once again either threaten to or go ahead with blocking this new round of sanctions? We have heard murmurings from Bratislava, from Budapest, that may be the way for them to go, and that may be their next action. So at the moment, there is a lot of bark from the European Commission, a lot of threats of these big sanctions, a proposed package to hurt the Russian economy and prevent the financing of its war effort. But at the moment, we have to wait for the member states to sign off and to see if President Trump is on board. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadye for TVP World.
The EU Commissioner for Defence, Andrius Kubilius, has cautioned the forthcoming American withdrawal from Europe is a reality. But as the continent attempts to heed this warning, spending billions in a bid to rearm itself at a rapid pace, Kubilius says these efforts simply aren't quick enough. More from our EU correspondent Angelos Kudjins in Brussels.
The EU Commissioner for Defence, Andrius Kubilius, has a stark warning for Europe. It is now not a matter of if the US will withdraw its military presence from Europe, but a matter of when. The comments came at the Brussels Security and Defence Summit on Tuesday, with that defence top boss outlining in his speech the contours, strengths and pitfalls behind Europe's defensive architecture. Now, he said that Europe will have to pay roughly $1 trillion, equating to almost 844 billion euros, to pay to fill the gap that the US will leave when it eventually leaves the continent. However, he said that EU member states will have to front up much more money if they don't take those threats of Russian aggression more seriously.
Reality: we are not at war, but we live in times of war. We can still avoid a bigger war by investing in the material side of defense and by building up new European security architecture.
TVP World did ask the European Commission spokesperson service what prompted these US comments from the Defence Commissioner, whether they were related to the US Secretary of Defence Pete Hegseth referring to Europe as freeloaders in March, of course, referring to the fact that only 2/3 of NATO military alliance members have hit that 2% funding benchmark. But TVP World, in an exclusive sit-down interview with the former Foreign Minister for Lithuania, Gabrielis Landsbergis, we asked him whether Europe was rearming itself at the necessary speed. He said there's still a long way to go.
We are in denial about Russia threats, and we're in denial about where the United States is currently at. And I think that we have to accept the fact that the US position is already different.
Yes, so as we heard from that Defence Commissioner, it is not a matter of if, but when the US will withdraw its presence from Europe, this becoming a stark reality. We know that various EU member states do not believe that Russian threat is at their doorstep. This is present in the fact that only 15 of them have applied to trigger their national escape clause, allowing them to spend almost 3% of their GDP on military ramp-up without falling foul of the EU's fiscal rules. But this will all be laid bare in a matter of weeks as those 32 NATO member alliance members will meet at The Hague to talk about Russian aggression and the need to scale up in the absence of the US. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Tomorrow, the Polish Parliament will hold a critical vote of confidence in Prime Minister Donald Tusk's coalition government. The vote comes in the wake of a narrow presidential election defeat by Tusk's ally, Rafał Trzaskowski, to right-wing candidate Karol Nawrocki, backed by the opposition Law and Justice Party. Seeking to reaffirm his government's mandate, called for the vote to demonstrate unity and resilience amid a shifting political landscape. The coalition holds a slim majority of 242 seats in the 460-seat parliament. A simple majority is needed to pass the vote, provided at least half the MPs are present. The outcome could shape Poland's political future, with Nawrocki's presidency expected to challenge Tusk's pro-European agenda through potential vetoes. Should the government lose the vote, Tusk will be required to resign. In the meantime, Polish President-elect Nawrocki held a phone conversation with his American counterpart Donald Trump. The former wrote on social media platform X, saying the pair discussed the close partnership between Warsaw and Washington, with both inviting each other to visit their respective presidential palaces. Romania's President Nicu Jordan has paid his first official foreign visit to neighbouring Moldova, as the government in Chișinău regards him as an important ally on the country's path to the EU. His support may prove critical for Maia Sandu's party ahead of Moldova's parliamentary election, set to take place this fall. Paweł Trzaskowski has this report.
Moldova's path to Brussels might lead through Bucharest. Romania's newly elected president, Nicu Jordan, met with his Moldovan counterpart in Chișinău today, a show of support for the country that hopes to join the bloc in 5 years.
When Chișinău and Bucharest join efforts, we improve lives in both our countries. Together we overcome challenges, and together we support Ukraine in its pursuit of peace. Moldova will earn its place in the European family, and Nicu Jordan and Romania stand with us.
And although Dan still has pressing matters to settle in his home country, including nominating the new Prime Minister,
the appointment of the Prime Minister this week is a possibility, not a promise.
Relations with Moldova are also high on the agenda, just as they were during the recent presidential race in the campaigns of both Nicu Jordan and his opponent George Simion. In Moldova, where Romanian is the official language, 8% of citizens are of Romanian nationality. In May's presidential runoff, Romanians in Moldova voted overwhelmingly for Nicu Jordan, giving him 88% of all the votes in this country. The alternative wouldn't guarantee such smooth talks with the current government in Chișinău. George Simeon, the leader of the hard-right Our Party, is still banned from entering Moldova until 2029, a consequence of his rallying for the unification of Romania and Moldova.
Parliaments in Chisinau and Bucharest must hear that today in the square of the National Assembly we have put but one wish: we want unification.
And even following the presidential election results, Simeon blamed Moldova, among others, for contributing to his defeat.
International observers saw interference not only from the Republic of Moldova, but also from the French state. Social media was manipulated and algorithms were used to influence Romanian citizens.
But the Constitutional Court of Romania dismissed Simeon's accusations, and it is the pro-European Dan who is now talking to the equally EU-oriented government in Chisinau, a harmony much needed ahead of September's general elections in Moldova, a target of Russian malign interference and a vote that could decide the country's future in the European bloc. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
The conflict between Polish national football team coach Michał Probierz and his best striker Robert Lewandowski has resulted in the latter losing the captaincy and eventually quitting the team. As new controversies surrounding the team emerge every few hours, the white and red face Finland in one of the most important games of the year. Piotr Miszczuk reports.
Will Robert Lewandowski put on his Poland national team kit ever again? That's the question that reverberated across the country since his shocking announcement to end his international career after head coach Michał Probierz said Lewandowski will no longer be the team's captain.
Considering the circumstances and the loss of trust in the coach of the Polish national team, I decided to resign from playing in the Polish national team as long as he is the coach. I hope that I will be able to play for the best fans in the world again.
Following Lewandowski's announcement, the head coach suggested his own decision came after talks with players and the staff.
After talking to many players, after talking to members of the staff, I had a day to think and to make a decision. After this analysis, I came to the conclusion that there will be a change of captain in our national team.
But these claims were later dismissed by the Polish Football Association.
In light of media reports that the team council of the Polish national team was behind the decision to change the captain, the Polish Football Association strongly denies these claims. No meeting took place between head coach Michał Probierz and the team council, and the decision was made solely by the coach.
Poland's all-time best scorer Lewandowski was repeatedly accused by many of caring only about his image, but the Barcelona striker was also dissatisfied with Probierz, who had close ties with the head of the Polish Football Association, according to TVP World sports correspondent John Carter.
Perhaps if another coach had been appointed, somebody who wasn't connected with the Football Association, rather actually the best man for the job, we could say, perhaps we wouldn't be in the situation in the first place where we have Poland's star player, Robert Lewandowski, becoming frustrated with the strategy, with the training, the coaching methods, etc.
The whole affair overshadowed the crucial game against Finland. Though Poland currently sits atop the table, Poland and Finland are likely to be vying for second place and a spot in the playoffs, as the first place is likely to be taken by the Netherlands. But the outcome of the game will also be decisive for Lewandowski and Probierz, according to experts.
I can see us losing heavily, and Michał Probierz, he would have to resign. I can see a scenario when we win comfortably because players will get united and so on and so on. And this would probably end Lewandowski's career in the national team.
Poland, who are ranked 34th in the FIFA ranking, are the clear favourites in the clash against Finland, placed 69th. But whether the morale of Polish players will now be affected by the affair and Lewandowski missing from the squad, we'll see in the coming hours. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
The Polish government is to face its biggest challenge yet, as tomorrow the parliament will decide its future in a vote of confidence. What are the possible scenarios? How strong is Donald Tusk's position? And who would like his cabinet to collapse? We'll discuss it with Alex Szczerbiak, Professor of Politics at the University of Sussex. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, First of all, there are 460 MPs in the Polish Sejm. Can Donald Tusk be sure of the parliamentary majority ahead of tomorrow's vote? Well, officially, just to remind our viewers, the ruling coalition consists of 242 MPs.
I think it's very likely that he'll win the vote. In fact, it's almost certain. I mean, after the defeat of the government's candidate in the presidential election, there was a shock that went through the governing coalition, and not surprisingly, because that defeat was widely interpreted as a vote of no confidence in the government. And in Mr. Tusk in particular, Mr. Tusk intervened very actively towards the end of the campaign, and his intervention was not felt to be helpful for the government's candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski. However, I think that since then, the situation within the governing coalition has, for the moment at least, calmed down. I think that they've decided that they need to keep the show on the road, that they need to come together and be united. In particular, they're very reluctant to break up the coalition, because that would mean loss of access to government appointments and patronage, which is the big glue that holds governments together in Poland. And in particular, the weakest link within the coalition, the Polish Peasant Party, this was the one that the opposition was trying to win over to their side, appears to have made it pretty clear that they're going to continue supporting the government. The leadership supports the government, and they did a consultation of their members, and it looks like 70% of them came out in favour of supporting the government. So I think he can be fairly confident that he's going to win this vote tomorrow.
So you expect basically no backstabbing tomorrow, but talking about the Polish People's Party, well, you know, there will be no party discipline during tomorrow's vote. So
I think most of the MPs will come round on the side of the leadership. I think there'll be one or two. The party always has a kind of couple of licensed rebels, if you like. And at the moment, that role is played by a chap called Marek Sawicki, who's quite a senior member of the party. He's a former agriculture minister, and he tends to kind of go out on a limb very often. I mean, he called for Mr. Tusk's resignation immediately after the election. He said that the government couldn't continue with him at the helm. But I think, with the exception of one or two outriders, I think that the party will continue to support the Tusk government, because, as I say, the key thing that really holds this coalition together, and indeed other governments, is access to state appointments, to state resources, to state patronage. And the Peasant Party, or the People's Party as it likes to call itself, this is a party that absolutely quintessentially, this is really important to it, getting access to these resources and to these appointments, both at the national level and reaching deep down into state appointments at regional and local level. And in particular, the party leader, Mr. Kosiniak-Kamysz, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, has made it absolutely clear that he has hitched himself to the government, to the governing party. So really, I think for this party to change allegiance would require a change of leadership, and that's not imminent. I mean, obviously the situation is a dynamic one. I mean, they're going to get through tomorrow, but the big problem that they've got, which is that they're very unpopular, they haven't implemented their promises, and it's going to be very difficult for them to do that, knowing that they're going to face a hostile president for the rest of the term, is not going to go away. So while tomorrow I think is going to be okay for them, there will be a show of unity, they will get through tomorrow okay. The fundamental problems within the coalition are still going to be there, and quite possibly could actually get worse. I mean, once governments get in a kind of a downward spiral, it's very, very difficult for them to get out of them, and I think that's the big risk for Mr. Tusk and his government.
And yet, Professor, we're talking politics, right? It is absolutely unpredictable. So let's now discuss the less probable scenario for tomorrow. What if Donald Tusk's government collapses tomorrow? And, well, then who is the winner of such a situation?
Well, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, there's a number of ways that you could come out of this. As I say, we're talking about what I think is the least likely scenario. But I mean, one possibility would be for the somebody else within the governing coalition to come to the fore. There's been some talk about Rafał Trzaskowski, the defeated presidential candidate, taking on that mantle. I'd be really surprised if that was a scenario. Radosław Sikorski, that's another name that's been floated, the foreign secretary who's very ambitious and I'm sure would be very happy doing the job. But I think, I mean, what you need to look at is, well, what needs to happen for the government to fall? And for the government to fall, it means that one of the kind of the governing parties has got to become disconnected from the coalition. And that means that there isn't a majority anymore for the governing coalition, which means that one of two things would happen. You would either get an alternative government formed, comprising Law and Justice, Confederation, and well, the Peasant Party is the most obvious option, or that you would go for a general election. And I think that neither of those are likely scenarios. I think that, for a general election, you need a 2/3 majority within Parliament, and that's not going to happen, or 3 successive attempts not to appoint a prime minister. The technical government thing, I mean, I think this is very unlikely. I actually, although they've been calling for it, I think the opposition, it's actually in the opposition's interests to allow the government to carry on governing, and hopefully for it to get into a downward spiral. So although, formally they've called for a technical coalition to be formed, just to remove the Tusk government, again, I really not sure that they actually want this to happen. As you say, it's politics and people call for very different things. So I think, we would really need to see some kind of shift in the tectonic plates of Polish politics within that governing coalition. And there is just no evidence that this is happening at the moment. That if anything, the situation has calmed down a little since the period immediately after the election, which obviously is going to take a bit of the drama out of tomorrow's vote, because it's the outcome is likely. But as I say, I think it's very short term. I think the problems of the government are not going to go away. They're still not getting their legislative program through. They're still going to face a hostile president. Mr. Tusk is still very, very unpopular. And I think the longer things go on, then it's much more likely that the centrifugal tendencies within the government will come to the fore, because at some point people decide the government is going to fall, that they're going to lose, and at that point individual parties' survival strategies become more important than keeping the government on the road. We're not at that point yet. But I think that's the next stage. I think the government will get through tomorrow, but at some point, I think, unless something radical changes, those parties are going to be looking at their own survival rather than the survival of the government.
And yet, if the government collapses, what will the next ruling coalition look like?
Well, as I say, I mean, the only alternatives would be a technical government, which would be formed by Law and Justice, the Radical Right, Confederation Party, and the only party within the government that could form that coalition would be the Peasant Party. Or you would have some attempt to try and resurrect the government, because one interpretation of this could be that this is a vote of no confidence in Mr. Tusk, and so let's try and cobble the government together with a different leader, and that would be the alternative scenario. But as I say, I keep coming back to this. I think this is very, very, very unlikely. I think the government there is no indication at the moment that governing coalition, that there are any votes other than the odd maverick. I mean, we're going to be talking about, there could well be Mr. Savitsky, maybe one or two others from the Peasant Party voting against, but there's no indication that there's going to be a groundswell within the Peasant Party bringing that government down.
Right. So if everything goes well for Donald Tusk tomorrow, he will have to cope with Poland's new president, and everybody knows it will be a difficult cohabitation. So how do you see the future of Donald Tusk's government?
He's going to try and announce some kind of fairly spectacular relaunch, I would have thought. He's going to try and look for some kind of something he can do to regain the initiative. And I think one thing he's going to try and do is to counter the narrative that it's a government that's not doing anything other than trying to sort of pursue its law and justice predecessor, the policy of the reckoning, if you like, sending prosecutors after them, having commissions of inquiry. So I think he's going to try and create the impression that actually there's a lot going on, that there's a lot more legislation in the pipeline or that has been passed. And so there'll be a kind of a communications offensive, if you like. Secondly, I think there'll probably be a legislative offensive. I think that, they will try and get as many bills through as they can, because one of the criticisms of the government beforehand was they used the fact there was going to be a presidential veto as an excuse, but that actually they weren't passing a lot of legislation anyway relating to their electoral promises, and therefore there was nothing for the president to veto. And in fact, the president only vetoed 6 laws. He actually allowed 100 to go through. So I think that's the next stage of what we'll see, a legislative offensive. I think there's 2 problems for Mr. Tusk. One of them is he's a politician who he's characterized by making big, high-profile announcements, very eye-catching. He's very, very good at this, but then he doesn't follow through on them. He's always operated on the principles that Poles politically forget things very, very quickly. His career has been marked by a whole series of these, big landmark speeches, landmark announcements, and then sort of nothing happens afterwards. And he's kind of got away with it really well. And I'm not sure he will be able to now, because
be
the
fair,
spotlight.
His career has
really
also been landmarked with major victories over the main opposition party, Law and Justice.
Absolutely.
Will the history repeat? Tomorrow we'll see. Alex Szerbiak, Professor of Politics at the University of Sussex, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. And stay with us for much more here on TVP World.